Okay, good evening, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to the January 3rd Planning Board meeting. First on the agenda, this is a short meeting. We have review the minutes from December 6th. And after that, we're going to have a discussion of the Lake and Pond Overlay District bylaw. So has everyone had a chance to look at those minutes from December 6th? Yep.
I have a question, Kate. When we talked about the Concom taking over the LPOD order, did we come to any decision on that? I mean, this leaves it as we had a discussion. They voiced their, the board members voiced their opinion. Did we come to any conclusion on that, or I get, this probably isn't the place where I say it. Can we come to some conclusion on what we're going to do? I hate to just kick this can down the road again like we do everything else, sort of.
So the minutes are based on the actual discussion.
Right, and we didn't come to any conclusion, is that?
Well, my understanding, my memory was that we talked, Nancy had asked that it be on the agenda. So I started off by asking her to, lead off so I could sort of understand what she was thinking a little bit more. And then we had a discussion, based on the email back and forth that we had all been part of with Concom. And we sort of summarized where we were at, which was that that the Concom, based on Tom LaBelle's research, the Concom couldn't actually take over a special permit bylaw, like the Lake and Pond Overlay District. So we talked about what we could do. And then, you gave your feedback, and the way it was left, and this is just my recollection of it.
That's what I was trying to think.
The way it was left was that we agreed we would all take a close read of the bylaw and then come back at the next meeting and have sort of a more thorough discussion of the bylaw based on having taken a close read of it.
Yeah, that's what I thought, that we were going to come back and revisit it. And I don't see it on our agenda.
Our agenda is the only.
Yeah, it's the only thing on the agenda.
Is that the Lake and Pond Overlay bylaw? Is that what you're?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's talking about.
6.5, the Lake and Pond.
Right, okay. So this is where we're going to address what we do about the Concom. Or are we
No, we're
just talking
about the bylaw itself.
the bylaw? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Are we going to talk about which one of these things we're going to do that was suggested to see if this is more of a Concom thing, or is that part of our discussion
I think,
tonight?
the first thing, what I asked at the last meeting was that I wanted to understand what was problematic about this bylaw for people on the board. And so, I wanted to talk about that. And then I wanted to also, just the same with the sign bylaw, talk about goals. What is it that we hope to accomplish here? So, but I felt that the first step was to just take a close read of the bylaw itself and, go through and talk about, what are some of the questions you might have? And, I've gone through it and I've made a list of things that, that I want to ask. But Donna's here. Donna Brewer is here, our town council. So, she's available to answer questions or comment.
But we had go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to pick up on that because that was our discussion last week at the end was what do we want to do? What would we prefer to do if possible to have Concom take it over? We all agreed that it's more in their purview than ours.
Well, I don't actually necessarily agree with that,
But I thought we had all sort of said that. Maybe you don't now, but I thought we were all pretty unanimous on that. But the other thing was, and I don't know if this is why town council is here, but it was going to involve her take on things. And is that why she's here, or is she here?
I'd like her to be available to answer, any questions. I have some questions about it that, I think it would be good for us to be able to ask and for, residents to hear her input. My feeling is that over the years, based on my experience with this bylaw, I know there's my sense is that it isn't working that well for the town and that we can do better. And in some ways, it's an interesting bylaw. It's a special permit, of course. And the board has, my understanding of it as a special permit is that the board has fairly broad discretion to do more with this bylaw, but it's also a complicated bylaw in that, it involves some of these conservation functions, things like soil, and stormwater runoff and measuring. So, my feeling is that I wanted to hear from other board members, and I don't know, is Carl here yet? Donna, can you hear?
I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can hear you. So today we've got Donna's here, Anita Schwerner's here, Patrick is here, and Carol Owens is here as well. So, I think, there are different things we can do with this to strengthen it. And, I have some ideas about that. And what I wanted to do tonight was hear, what are the things that you think are working? Maybe you think nothing about it is working. What is it that you think needs to be better? And, once I have a better sense of that, then we can take it from there.
So we're going to put this discussion aside about the Concom?
We're not putting anything aside. We're talking about the bylaw itself, what's working and what isn't working. And, what are your thoughts about this bylaw? What would you like to see improved?
So we're going to put that aside for now.
Well, I was just going to ask one question though, because Tom LaBelle came up with this thing saying that it's not their jurisdiction. So that's really true. And I think that's a Donna question.
Yep, that's a Donna. Donna?
Yep.
Can
Yeah.
you-
So if it's going to be a special permit under the zoning bylaw, then conservation is not one of the boards or committees that is authorized under the Zoning Act to be a special permit granting authority.
There you go.
Right, but we could potentially, I'm asking you, could we potentially remove some of the conservation aspects, soil, some of the stormwater runoff that address things like, permeable surfaces, and potentially those parts could be removed and transferred to the Concom. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
So the planning board could handle the actual more of the infrastructure, the built environment, and Concom could have more, they could have control over
Wetlands.
everything that has to do with the bordering vegetated area and the LPOD.
Right, and the stormwater issues and all the rest of it. Yeah, you could split it to be a more natural division between what the planning board usually looks at and what the Concom usually looks at. Such as you guys are really concerned about density and setbacks and height restrictions and, and uses of the property, as opposed to Concom being more interested in things like protecting the bordering vegetative wetlands areas, or, next to the rivers and the stormwater and all the rest of it.
Okay.
Question?
Yeah.
So we could essentially pull the responsibilities in the bylaw apart, if you will, and re-delegate some of those without infringing on the legalities of it. We could make them responsible or ask them if they'll take on certain portions of it. And we don't need a whole, well, I think you understand what I'm asking.
I do. And yes, we'd have to transfer some of the verbiage or responsibilities that's now in the zoning bylaw and put them in the general bylaw.
Okay. So, I have a few questions, about the bylaw as it stands with the planning board. One question I have is that, I know that does Massachusetts general law speak to site plans and exactly what that entails? I mean, my understanding is that we don't have a definition for site plans, and maybe we don't need one, but my understanding is that a site plan is a stamped plan, stamped by a surveyor with an active license. Can you speak to site plans?
Yeah, so as site plan is used in the zoning bylaw, it is not anything that you're going to find in the zoning act. Site plan review and approval is something that just arises out of your inherent home rule authority as a municipality. So it can be whatever you want it to be. What the courts have said, though, for site plan review is that you cannot deny a site plan request unless the application is incomplete. But you can either approve it or approve it with conditions. So that's what site plan means in the context that it's now used in section 6.5.
Yeah.
Because it's talking about, it wants site plan review as well as a special permit. But a site plan could actually refer to a plan of the site that is stamped by a surveyor or an engineer or an architect.
But in our current bylaw, is that specified that we get a stamped plan? Because often in the past, we have not.
No, it does not. Where site plan is used right now in 6.5, it's only referring to site plan review. And so it does not require any kind of stamped plan.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay. Well, I'm scribbling. Does anyone have a?
These are correct. These minutes are correct.
Oh, yeah, we'll get back to those. We got a little bit sidetracked on those minutes.
Right.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Yeah, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's all set. Okay, back to Lake and Pond Overlay District bylaw. Okay, in terms of, one thing that I've wondered about, Donna, is that I have a feeling we are not doing entirely the way maybe it's supposed to be done is, so once you've heard your special permit and you've closed the public hearing, the board has deliberated and there's been a motion to approve or not. At that point, you do the findings and there's supposed to be a report, is my understanding. Can you speak a little bit to that part of the process?
No, you do. You'll then have findings and a decision, which will and that all gets filed with the town clerk.
So the findings and the decision is not something that we have, that happens at the meeting, but that's not something that I need to actually write up myself or?
Well, somebody's going to need to write it up, and it can be, oftentimes communities will ask the planning board coordinator or agent to do a draft and then submit it to the board at its next meeting to approve. Or sometimes you'll have a draft. If you get a sense as to where the board is going from the prior meetings, you can have a draft to discuss with the board at the meeting where you close the public hearing and have a discussion among yourselves.
Okay. All right. Hi, Carl. You're muted.
Sorry to be late. I was on a phone call with my job, so
That's okay, not to worry about it. Okay,
I approve the minutes.
thank you. So, it sounds like, Carl, what we've been talking about is removing, sort of separating out some of the conservation components of the Lake and Pond Overlay District bylaw.
Oh,
And, that part could go to Conservation Commission.
And a ton of it.
So we've been talking a little bit about that possibility.
Yeah.
It's,
I agree.
well, they have a certain authority there.
yeah, yeah. So that would involve working on the bylaw wording, of course. And is that something that, do you guys have any thoughts about that? Is that something that you feel positively about?
Well, certainly we can pull out the parts that we're saying conservation, and they're all written out very clearly. We just take that and take that out.
Like soil-based,
Yeah, all
the
of
whole that, yeah, that.
Yep, and wetland.
It's interesting if you look at the wetlands protection in the regular bylaws, a ton of the stuff that Concom is responsible for is kind of what's
Right here.
in this, yeah. So it'd be interesting to
Compare
see how
notes.
they compare and see what we can give to them because they do already. And what we need to keep
As ours.
because that's our job.
Right, right.
That's
I
all.
mean, this, one thing, this takes a little bit of time, working on bylaw wording. And, one possibility is that now that Kara has, taken a job in North County,
Yes, I saw that in the
yeah,
paper.
that potentially, I've asked Michael to send me, the year-to-date actuals because we're no longer obligated to that contract. So potentially we could use those funds. In the meantime, we have a special permit coming up to tap into the expertise of David Cameron, who we couldn't use because he's being, he's used under Concom funds. Potentially, we could use him in the meantime, and he might have some suggestions, for how we would, what would make sense for this as well.
Yeah, their man is very nice, that David, whatever his.
Cameron,
He's-
David Cameron, yeah. And he's certainly, he was the Western Massachusetts Division Chief of the DEP, I think.
Very knowledgeable.
Yeah, so that's one thing that I've been thinking about. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about that idea.
Yeah, he would know what they cover.
He would really know, I mean, he knows the Wetlands Protection Act
They're supposed
backwards
to
and
cover in there.
yeah,
Right, he would,
It'd be interesting to have him come to one of our meetings
right,
and
yeah.
think about that, with that in mind.
that's a good idea, Kate. Thank you.
All right, okay, so do I have, should I go ahead and see if I can get him to come to a meeting and,
So we can let him know what it is we're asking for.
yep. Just get his, I mean, he's got such experience dealing with these, as, his role was to oversee the circuit riders for Western Massachusetts who were reviewing all the notice of intents for the Concom. So he certainly has the background.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
He
and it
could
was-
separate this quicker than we could.
I was just going to say that. We'll go around and around and around
Familiar
about
with-
this.
Right.
And he'll just say, no, this is theirs, this is yours.
he's got the expertise.
And he could pull
Absolutely.
this apart and say,
Right,
All right,
Here.
okay. So I'll reach out to him.
That would be great.
Okay.
need a motion
I
for
think that would be very
Yes,
helpful.
I do.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll make a motion to call, contact David Cameron and see if he's available to do this, and if so, to help us with it.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, we have to do a roll call vote. Aye, Kate?
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Marie?
hi, Wayne.
Aye, Carl.
Okay, we have to do that for the minutes too, so.
I think, oh, again?
All right. We're
Wasn't
good.
here then.
Well, now
Okay.
that I finally showed up, So
So any other, we've got Donna here, so any other questions? I've got my answers to what I wanted to ask her about.
I have a question, kind of continuing where I was before. Is this, you heard what we're discussing, is what we're discussing less cumbersome than the idea we had prior, that is more a legalistic challenge than what we're talking about here?
I would say yes. I'd also say that it makes a lot of sense to try to separate out the things that you guys don't usually have to deal with from those things that you do.
I think it's a start. I think it's a really good start. And that, this is the perfect place to, to begin to address what has been, I'm going to tell you guys that, when we had the zoning review committee, and Ray was still, I guess he was more active than he is now, Donna, but at that point I touched base with him on the Cottage Era Estate bylaw, and he told me that when he first came on board as town council, the town was just in the process of ushering in their zoning, and he warned the town officials that he felt there were two bylaws that were going to be problematic. One was the Cottage Era Estate bylaw, and the other was the LPOD. I would say that was fairly prescient. Those are two bylaws that have not quite worked for us.
We're
So,
here to fix things.
We're here to, we're going to give it our best. So, yeah. So good.
least
Any other questions for Donna?
Would this be, we have struggled over several big lots, big houses being put on small lots around Stockbridge Bowl. And recently we had one that came very close to the lines that we said,
Which one, Marie?
the one on, by the bridge, by Hawthorne Street. The house was so big and it came right to the edge of where they could do it.
The one sort of on the outcropping of rock, north of the causeway?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm kind of thinking of. And at that point, we kind of said, should we change the bylaw? If we don't want great big giant houses, we can't have a bylaw that permits them. Would this be a time to think about if that's what we want to do?
Absolutely.
Do we want to say, okay, it can't be 15%, it can only be 10% or whatever, how we can fix
Absolutely.
it. So if it's giant houses and blasting and stuff that we don't really want, I mean, I don't know if there's still any land left, but
I would say,
10% right now.
I would say that, you know me, I like to sort of work in a systematic and incremental way. So my comment is, let's start with the conservation part and, see what we get from David, and keep the idea of addressing density for now on the back burner, with the idea that, we'll sort of do it one step at a time.
we just do it one step at a time and we never get anywhere. I mean, if we look at the bylaw and eliminate the parts that might possibly be Concom stuff, like the density. I mean, is there any reason not to kind of look at that tonight as we're going, things like.
I think that it's definitely something that's on my mind, and I've been giving a lot of thought to it. And what I'd like to do is, why don't you all think about the density question? And unless you've already.
It's around the lake, right? So if
Well,
you do
this
it
is
around the lake.
LPOD. I mean, this is LPOD. That's all we have.
This is the LPOD,
Yeah,
yeah.
we don't have jurisdiction.
well, the thing
I
about,
understand. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, the thing about the LPOD is that it's honestly one of the few tools that the town has to control development, specifically around the lake. And there are relatively you know, I mean, there's not a lot of historic preservation issues that that come up there. The zoning is quite tight, and so LPOD is actually really important in terms of controlling density around Stockbridge Bowl.
I agree. You know, and one thing that I've been thinking a little bit about is the idea that it's not working for us as a special permit. And that if there is a way to make it very clear, you know, these are what the setbacks are, you know, this is what you can do, and this, and that may mean having the bylaw more closely reflect the reality on the ground in the LPOD. But you know, over the 10 years that I've been working with this bylaw, I sometimes wonder if having it as a special permit is doing us any favors, as opposed to having it be just very cut and dry. This is, you know, and this, you know, you might have to have another zone around the lake to accommodate, you know, the existing, but such that, you know, because what I've observed is that boards don't like to say no. So you're ending up with some of these projects that, you know, I have to look at some of them and wonder, do they actually, you know, do they actually meet the LPOD bylaw? And my understanding of special permits is that we have broad discretion. I'd like to hear, you know, Donna, you can speak to that. But that said, it's not happening. So I'd be interested to hear your input on that, Donna.
You're absolutely right. Yes, you have broad discretion in reviewing applications for site plan for special permits.
I mean, you just have to, you know, be clear about, you can address setbacks. You can say, well, you know, on this plot of land, this setback does not work for this reason. And you just have to be clear as to your reason. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
But if you do that, if you have a stated lot coverage or a stated setback, and you're saying, in my opinion, I don't agree with that, doesn't that land you in court?
Well, I mean, usually you land in court when you deny a special permit, not when you grant it. You know, the neighbors usually aren't inclined to spend money to enforce the zoning bylaw, and then when they do, they are faced with a formidable bar based on standing. So if you decide in your discretion that you want to waive a particular portion of what would otherwise be required, then within your discretion, you're going to be allowed to do that. And the court might even disagree with you, but it is not allowed to substitute its judgment for yours.
But if you then in another situation come across the same thing but don't similarly advise or suggest or demand, do you get into a slippery slope?
No, typically you're not going to be held to the decisions that you've done before, especially in land use cases. They will look at the unique circumstances of the application before you. So if somebody said you made a mistake before, well, you're not required to keep making that mistake.
So it doesn't set a precedent.
It does not set a precedent.
So when does the whole arbitrary and capricious thing come in?
So that's going to come in if the court finds that, let's say you grant your special permit, but you impose a whole bunch of conditions. And if the court would find that those conditions really have nothing to do with the elements that the LPOD is supposed to be protecting, then the court will find those to be arbitrary and capricious.
This is
as an
helpful.
example.
But what about house design and house size? Maybe that's house size is already addressed, but, you know, characteristics of a house or design in it in any given circumstance.
So that's the interesting thing about it. That is not something that is covered in the LPOD. You know, if somebody wants to put a house that looks like, you know, a Frank Lloyd Wright house and you happen not to like Frank Lloyd Wright design, that's not something you can address under the LPOD. What's curious is that the wetlands article in the general bylaw does include under natural scenic qualities, aesthetic and historic features. So that's something the CONCOM gets under the wetlands bylaw, but not under the LPOD.
Interesting. Wow.
Sounds like that should come to us.
Have you seen the drawings for the slug house?
Sorry, Carl?
Have you seen the drawings for the slug house?
Let's slug house.
No, where,
It's
What's
over
the-
by, it's over by Camp Mackinac.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, the New Jersey Office Park.
Yeah, oh no.
Should we be derogatory to those folks? I'm sorry, but if they like it, they like it. We're having the conversation because of houses like that, but
It might be interesting. I'm not sure.
It's his opinion.
I guess.
So anyway,
Kate,
yeah. Who's
I
that?
it's Patrick. I have my hand up.
Patrick? Yep, I can hear you.
Look, I think one of the problems with LPOD has nothing to do with jurisdiction. I mean, my first comment is just one of how a process will work. You know, this is a bylaw that requires a permit and requires findings. And so are you talking about outsourcing some of the findings to CONCOM? Are you going to be bound by those findings? I mean, it's creating more bureaucracy, I think, possibly to split this off. Just looking at the bylaw, you know, the thing that sticks out to me the most is under 6.5.9b. It says natural vegetation shall be maintained, it uses the word shall, be maintained on at least 75% of the total lot area within the LPOD. How many of us can name a dozen properties that got permitted from the time that I was on CONCOM to the planning board to the select board? We don't enforce that part of the bylaw. We just don't, okay? The bylaw has requirements that I think really have nothing to do with who's doing the work. It's just the reality is that, you know, it would be very impactful to require folks who want to make changes to their properties within the LPOD to follow 6.5.9b. And I really think that that's kind of the thing that protects the lake the most is the you know, kind of border vegetation. And I don't think it matters whether you bring in David. Everyone's going to tell you the same thing, that maintain the border vegetation and you maintain the health of the lake. And yet we're not so far doing that. And I think that this question of enforcement of the existing bylaw is at least as salient as how you might, you know, kind of rearrange the chess pieces to decide who says yay and who says nay.
That's kind of like a separate thing. Enforcement is what you're talking about. And
No, think people get permits when they don't meet 6.5.9b, erosion and sedimentation control. They're not doing it and they're getting permits.
But I would say to that, Patrick, that I think in many of the presentations, you're thinking of not touching it at all, whereas shall be maintained, they a lot of times will take the invasives out and do what's supposed to be naturally occurring there, and putting back what's naturally occurring there. Doesn't mean that they're not touching it initially, I think is what that says.
well,
Yeah, I'm just saying, Wayne, it's 150 feet from the shoreline. 75% is supposed to be natural vegetation. And it's just, maybe it's not realistic. Maybe it should be 33% or 50%.
I think that's more to the point that, you know, you're right. It's never happening, and it's never happening because it's not realistic. But again, I think that's a different issue, and that's something that, can also be addressed. And, I guess my feeling is that, look, with Conservation Commission, you have a board that's more likely to be self-selected for their interest in all things conservation. So I guess, my vote would be that that's something that they could use their experience and expertise to weigh in on that 75% and potentially change that.
And I guess my last comment, Kate, and I'll be quiet, is there an option to just simply have a regulation that says you're going to have a joint finding by the conservation agent, in this case, Fleetwood Partners, that would take into account both the town and state wetlands protection bylaw, as well as the LPOD, to give a recommendation to the permitting authorities. In the case of the town wetlands bylaw, it's conservation. In the case of LPOD, it's you guys. And rather than kind of do all the work to separate everything out, just simply contract with David and his company to do a joint, I guess, evaluation of the situation based on the combined bylaws, rather than, because I don't know, looking at things like soil and loam and, sandy loam and the texture class, I'm not sure conservation is any more qualified to do that work without an expert consultant than you guys are. I certainly, speaking for myself, when I was on that board, I certainly didn't have that qualification to set soil-based stormwater infiltration rates. It could just be you need to kind of, make sure that this oversight is managed in conjunction with the oversight from the wetlands bylaw.
I think that's that's definitely a possibility, for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think Marie has her,
I think the wording on some of these, like the 75% going back to, the size of those lots doesn't make it possible to have 75% of the total lot area vegetation. You wouldn't even have room for a house on most of those.
I agree.
So the wording on these is not practical to enforce.
Right.
That's part of the problem.
and that's, it's just sort of, we have been recognizing that in, many of the projects that we've reviewed. I mean, I have not heard once somebody at the planning board level, bring up, gee, this doesn't meet the 75% lot coverage.
Yeah.
Although I do think sometimes we could have done better with that regard in terms of coverage. But,
Even if it didn't say total, if it said, where the house is, of the natural thing, 75% has to be natural.
I think that's a good one for David.
I think that's, I think that wording on many of that's just an example, but some of them just don't make sense on the size lots that we're dealing with, so you can't enforce them.
Right.
And so therefore,
But, ultimately, the important thing is to approach things so that we're not, we're not contaminating the lake with stormwater runoff.
Exactly.
And,
it has to be able to be realistic in
yeah,
order to be enforced. And therefore, these are,
yeah, I agree.
for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it can be done. It's a balancing act. And, but we do need that expertise to weigh in. And I feel that, between David and Donna, we've got what we need to take this on and fix it. Wayne?
I think that the expertise that we rely on in many cases is the proposer and the architects that go through all the requirements that we make them sign off on. Now, if they're not producing true and correct information, I don't know. I think they are most times. I don't think they have a reason not to, but because they have to do business in this area time and time again. So I'm not suggesting that at all. But what I'm saying to Patrick's question is that, no, I don't know about those soil rates and infiltrate. I don't. But somebody has to, and most times it's those architects and engineers that are developing the plan for that property. And we make them sign that, a list of things that make sure that they are doing that, because we don't know how to do it, but we're making sure that they do,
Well,
that their numbers are correct. Now, if in a given instance, we don't think that their numbers are true and correct, that's one thing. But, and just one other thing to tag on to what Patrick said, I want to make sure before we go through all this, that we are not just doing an exercise that takes some of the work off our plate. If this is what we're supposed to do and it makes sense for us to do it, let's do it. And before we try to give it to Concom, because they're in the same, I think, place where the numbers that are presented to them on water flows and infiltration, like Patrick said, they're more inclined to know about these things, but they're not necessarily professionals on it. And they're going to rely on those same numbers that we are. So,
brings us back to what I was saying in the beginning, which is that I don't necessarily agree with this whole thing being moved, hook, line and sinker over to the Concom. I don't, in some ways, I think, this is something that the planning board can and should do.
With help from somebody like David Cameron.
With expertise, yeah, with experts.
Because none of us are
yeah.
experts on this, that's
Yeah,
clear.
yeah, and I think that a lot of the presenters do have integrity, but I can tell you that I have seen I have some examples, which I won't go into, of situations where
well, there's always
They're
bad
representing-
apples. There's always a bad apple.
they're representing the client, and
Well, but
that's a very different context from we're representing the interest of the town. The lake is a public good. It's not just the lake, it's all, the waterways that we oversee, including Campusa Bog, which is a rare, area of environmental concern. So, these are really important resources and, we should give it the attention that they're, that's due here.
So say we continue to do this, or anybody does this. So we get a plan, it's beautiful, it's all, we sign off. Who's checking this when it's being done or after? How do we know that it's really being followed the way
Donna
it was set up?
Donna will review. She reviewed the signed bylaw.
No, I mean the work that's being done.
Checking it.
Like
Oh.
who's going to the site and saying, oh, yes, it's.
Yeah, so enforcement.
The Concom now has someone that is supposed to be doing that.
Is David checking?
David is supposed to be, yeah.
Yeah.
When they say, it has to be whatever by a certain date and stuff. David is checking their,
Does he then report back to the Concom?
I believe so.
Okay, so we should find that out. So we can, I can look into
That's
that.
nice, but that was always their problem as well.
Right,
They
right.
had no one checking unless they did it.
Well, and because people run into things and it doesn't go exactly
Sure.
as they want, which is very true around here. We always run into things that you don't. But are there, are people checking in? Do we know what's going on? How is it being fixed? And is it within the law?
Right. And Nick has a certain amount of, he backs our stuff up.
And we can always ask
That
him,
has to approve certain things.
we can ask him to take a look at things but there is a time frame that we have to work within. And Donna, can you speak to that? What's the time frame within which Ned can, if we ask him to take a look at something?
You mean to look at an application or to look at the work or what?
To go on site.
Oh, to go on site for the purposes of checking what they're doing?
Yeah,
So under the bylaw, their work that they're supposed to do, all of their disturbance is supposed to be done within 90 days. So you should, 90 days is the maximum activity time that they've got under 6.5.9.
and that's,
Is that reasonable?
Depends on the weather.
That's a good question. So it sounds to me like you've got things, you have not enforced the strict letter of the law in the bylaw because it simply isn't reasonable. So if you don't want to move things over to the Conscom, it does sound as if you need to review those things that are reasonable to impose on landowners and those that simply aren't. And I've been hearing a lot about density and the concern about these huge houses being put on these small lots. You might want to consider changing the description of the density to be that if a existing structure is replaced or expanded, that the new or expanded structure cannot exceed some percentage of the current size, so that, you know, the structure cannot exceed 110% of the current square footage living area or something like that.
Right, but then you get into who's actually monitoring that.
Well, that would be
That's
part of the
in the plan.
application.
Yeah, it's going to be
That's
part
us.
of the
We
application. Yeah.
we have that language, but I think we've inherited, you know, from the subdivisions of the 1950s, a lot of very tiny lots around the bowl that just you know, appear to be incredibly desirable for people to build big houses on these days, and it's a headache.
Well, yeah, at the moment, the bylaw limits them on setbacks. And then you're going to have your general bylaw that's going to limit you on height.
Covered.
And you've got the issues of impermeability, but nothing like,
All those,
They want-
and every one of those parameters has been pushed to the limits.
yeah.
New project. Yeah.
So I think that, this sort of gets back to my idea that the problem lies with it being a special permit instead of being cut and dried. Why don't we just think about that?
Are you proposing that we would change some of the overall limitations on lot build out and?
Well, I'm not looking to make it more dense, certainly, and I'm not, I don't.
Oh, I'm not.
Yeah. But it just seems to me like I know, if you make it clear so that, because right now, when it's not clear, that's where you're more likely to get abuse of the bylaw.
Well, it's
I think
10%.
that's what's happening.
It's 10%.
Right.
Well, if you can tell me how that property, well,
And then you look at how big the property is and how much bigger the houses get.
yeah,
No, what Donna said is a way, but right now we're 10% of the lot coverage.
well, it's 15% unless it's in the unless it's the R2, it's 15%. In the R2, it's 10%. So, why don't we give some thought to, the good news is it sounds like there's consensus. I mean, I know Nancy's not here, but it sounds like there's consensus that density is something that we need to be addressing because it's over the top.
Do we have to be careful if it's, like you say, you don't want something that's just cut and dry and something? Do we have to be careful that it then depends on the makeup of the planning board and how they feel about being?
That's my point.
Change. So if,
That's my point, Marie, is that,
Yeah,
is
I
that
mean,
you
if-
make it cut and dry so it's not dependent.
yeah,
Yeah.
I thought you were saying you don't want to cut.
No.
You want to have some
no.
leeway.
No.
Oh, okay, no.
Yeah.
I'm
No, just the
thinking-
opposite.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'd like-
I misunderstood what you
I'd
said.
like to have a pamphlet to hand out to everybody who's thinking about doing, like a simple, this is what you can, this is what it should be. It would be so easy for somebody to then go to their architect and this is what we can, do. We want to do.
Yeah, often people just want things, they just want it to be really clear. They want to know, what
Absolutely.
can we do and what can we not do?
Right.
And it's when things aren't clear that you start seeing, people gaming the system. So,
Well, there's a big investment, that people put into design and then being told, to tear up their plans is maddening. So, again, I agree with you that like having clear parameters to begin with is a really good idea.
yeah,
And maybe we need to scale those back.
yeah. So, why don't we think about it and I think we've made some headway here, and I will talk to David Cameron and see about getting him, to one of our upcoming meetings.
That'd be great.
I hope the next meeting.
We have something, a permit next.
We have a special permit, and we'll need to do anyone who wants to do a site visit, Jennifer will be in touch about setting that up. Okay?
Very good.
Okay. All right, anything else? No? Donna, thank you so much.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
Thank you,
Anytime.
Donna.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Marie.
Hi, Wayne.
Well,
Thank you, everyone.